The sun beat down on the wooden planks of the town square, relentless and unyielding. Dust swirled in the wind, catching in the cracks between boards and settling on the faces of the gathered townsfolk. A small girl clung to her mother's skirts, fingers curling around coarse fabric, nails white with fear. Her wide eyes darted from the sneering crowd to the auction block where her mother was dragged forward. "Accused of theft!" the marshal barked, voice cracking like a whip across the quiet square. The mother's cheeks burned, not from shame, but from injustice. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words were swallowed by laughter and jeers. A child's scream tore through the clamor. "Mama!" The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice as dry as the parched earth beneath them, raised his gavel. The crowd surged closer, hungry for spectacle, faces twisted with delight in others' misfortune. The girl's fingers clenched the small locket around her neck, worn and tarnished, a last remnant of her family. Its tiny hinge dug into her palm, grounding her in a fragile hope she did not understand. From the shadowed edge of the square, a figure moved, deliberate, silent. A cowboy, tall and broad, hat pulled low, eyes narrowed against the sun and the unfairness of it all. His jaw tightened, fists flexing at his sides. Each swing of the auctioneer's hammer on the block felt like a strike against his own moral code. Innocent punished. Fear exploited. He had seen this world twist like a knife before, and his stomach coiled with anger. The mother's voice rose, trembling, pleading. "I did not please." Her words dissolved in a tide of ridicule. The crowd's delight swelled as the gavel fell again, and then she was gone, pulled toward a waiting wagon, hands bound, skirt catching on the rough boards. The girl's scream cut the air, raw and desperate. "Mama!" Time seemed to stretch. The cowboy moved. One long step, then another, boots stirring dust clouds, cutting through the mob like a blade through canvas. He did not speak. There was no time for words. His presence alone, solid, unyielding, forced townsfolk aside. Fingers jabbed, fists clenched, but he did not falter. The girl turned to him, confusion wide in her gaze. Her small body trembled, heart hammering in her chest. She saw in his stance something she hadn't dared to hope for. Protection, courage, and perhaps understanding. With tentative hands, she reached toward him, pressing the locket into his palm as if offering both trust and plea. "You have to help me," she whispered, voice barely audible above the dying shouts of the crowd. The cowboy's eyes flicked to the locket. It was old, dented, scratched, but to him it spoke of more than a child's fear. It was a symbol, small and potent, of what had been lost and what must be safeguarded. A vow, unspoken but absolute, settled deep in his chest. Around them, the town continued its murmur, a low, resentful hum of those who had watched and done nothing. Dust clung to the cowboy's coat, wind tugged at his hat, and the girl's hair whipped across her pale face. Every sound was magnified. The creak of a wagon wheel, the shuffle of boots on boards, the distant bark of a dog warning of the approaching heat. The frontier did not forgive easily. Neither did he. He knelt, lowering himself to the girl's height, his shadow stretching long and protective over her small frame. "We'll be all right," he said, voice rough as gravel, yet carrying a quiet certainty. He did not ask her to trust him, only offered the assurance of his actions to follow. Behind them, the crowd hesitated, unsure now, their cruelty tempered by the silent strength before them. The wind lifted again, scattering more dust, and in that moment, the cowboy took the girl's hand. Her fingers curled around his calloused palm, and the locket rested between them like a fragile promise. She blinked up at him, eyes shimmering with tears and tentative hope. He gave a slight nod, tight and deliberate, signaling the beginning of a journey neither of them had chosen, but both would endure. The auction block remained behind them, its injustice a stark contrast to the uncertain sanctuary forming in the shadow of his protection. The square emptied, the jeers fading into memory. The locket caught a sliver of sun, glinting as if echoing the unspoken vow between man and child. They moved together through the dust-choked streets, each step forward a defiance of cruelty. The cowboy's jaw remained set, the girl's small hand gripping his, and the frontier, harsh, indifferent, wild, stretched ahead. And in that harsh, sun-baked silence, the first threads of trust were woven, fragile as the locket in her hand, but unbreakable enough to carry them into the unknown. The canyon stretched before them, a jagged scar of stone and dust beneath the blazing sun. The girl trudged behind the cowboy, boots scraping against dry creek beds, legs trembling from fear and fatigue. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind through the scrub made her heart pound. He walked ahead, steady and silent, hat low over his eyes, shoulders squared like a wall against the world. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice small, testing the space between them. He didn't answer, only glanced back once, eyes softening for a fleeting second before returning to the trail. Words were expensive, unnecessary. Yet in the tilt of his head, the brief brush of his hand when she stumbled, she felt an unspoken promise. The locket around her neck caught a stray ray of sun. It glinted, dull gold against her dirt-streaked skin. His gaze flicked to it, just a heartbeat too long. Recognition crossed his face, hidden beneath a flicker of pain he didn't speak. He lowered his eyes, adjusting the strap of his pack, hiding the tremor of memory it stirred. The path narrowed, cliffs looming like silent sentinels. A dry riverbed yawned before them, stones loose and slick with dust. "Hold tight," he murmured, almost to himself, then swung her up onto the horse he had tethered nearby. She squealed, legs dangling, heart in her throat. But he steadied her with careful hands, face set in a grim line. He mounted behind her, the horse lurching forward. Water splashed over rock as they crossed, horse slipping on unseen stones. He gritted his teeth, one arm wrapped around her, body pressing her close to shield her from the sudden spray. The girl gasped, fear mixing with exhilaration, and for the first time, she saw the quiet ferocity in his eyes, the lengths he would go to keep her safe. By mid-afternoon, the canyon walls opened to a stretch of scrubland. They moved cautiously, alert to every shape in the distance, bounty hunters' hats glinting, suspicious townsfolk lingering at crossroads. Each step carried a tension that made her stomach coil, yet she trusted him more with every mile. His silence was not cold, it was careful, protective, deliberate. By the time the sun began its descent, they reached a lone oak tree, gnarled and stubborn in the arid land. The cowboys set down their packs, arranging rocks to hold a small fire. Sparks curled into the dry evening air, smoke drifting upward as night stretched its arms over the plains. She leaned against him, eyes wide but heavy with exhaustion. "Will they find us?" she whispered, voice muffled by sleep and fear. "They'll try," he said, voice low, steady. "But we'll stay ahead." She nodded, curling into the warmth of his side. Her fingers rested over the locket, clutching it like a lifeline. He allowed a brief glance at the tiny ornament, remembering a time long past, a family lost, a life he had buried under dust and grit. That small trinket now bridged two worlds, the past he carried in silence, and the present he protected fiercely. The fire crackled, shadows flickering across the uneven ground. She drifted into sleep, the first peaceful moments since the auction, her breathing slow and even. The cowboy stayed awake, knees drawn to his chest, one hand on the rifle resting beside him. The night was thick, the air sharp with cold, and the scent of pine and dust. A rustle in the brush cut through the crackle of flames. His eyes snapped toward the sound, pupils narrowing. The wind carried faint whispers, the hint of movement they could not yet identify. He tightened his grip on the rifle, muscles coiling, body poised like a spring. The girl stirred in her sleep, hand brushing his arm. He did not wake her, only shifted slightly, eyes scanning the darkness. Every shadow could be a threat, every distant sound a warning. The frontier offered no mercy, no pause. Danger was patient. He exhaled slowly, chest rising and falling in the rhythm of control. Yet inside a storm of vigilance and worry raged. The locket glimmered faintly in the firelight, a reminder of why he had taken this path, why he had sworn protection. He would not fail her, not now, not ever. The fire dwindled to embers. The wind carried on through the scrub, whispering secrets of the night. The cowboy remained awake, eyes sharp, senses stretched to the edge of the darkness. Somewhere beyond the tree line, pursuit waited. Somewhere out there, the world's cruelty was still patient, still hunting, and yet beneath the oak, in the circle of firelight and dust, a fragile trust had taken root. A child slept, protected by a man shaped by loss and resolve. The night held its breath, the land silent except for the faint rustle of leaves, the snap of a distant twig. Danger was close. but so was hope. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the fading sky, pine needles rustling in a cool breeze that smelled of earth and cold stone. The cowboy led the girl along a narrow trail, boots crunching over frost-hardened dirt, every step measured, careful. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching long and thin across the ridges. Ahead, a cabin emerged, small, weathered, but solid, tucked among a grove of whispering pines. He paused, scanning the tree line. No movement, no glint of eyes in the shadows. Satisfied, he motioned for the girl to follow. She stumbled over exposed roots, cheeks pink from the climb and wind, and he bent to steady her, hands firm but gentle. Her small fingers grazed his wrist, holding on for both balance and reassurance. The cabin smelled of dust and wood, the remnants of years gone by. Broken shutters swung with the wind. Inside, the hearth lay cold, stones chipped but intact. The cowboy set to work, gathering dry branches and kindling, striking flint sparks, and fire licked at the logs. The warmth spread slowly, curling into the corners, chasing away the chill of the mountain evening. He laid blankets for her near the hearth, tucking edges around her small frame. She watched, wide-eyed, as he moved with quiet precision, a man whose stoicism carried both strength and care. They began to explore the cabin together. A cracked cup, stained and chipped, sat on a shelf. A photograph in a faded frame depicted a family frozen in smiles that no longer existed. She picked it up, tracing the faces with trembling fingers. The cowboy watched her from the doorway, silent, eyes softened by something she could not name. Fragile hope lingered in that small space, echoing the life they were trying to build, piece by piece. He spoke little, but each word carried weight. "Water runs clear at the creek," he said once, motioning outside. "Track the deer by the prints near the pine," she repeated after him, stumbling over words and rocks alike, but learning. He taught her how to read the skies, the shape of clouds, the shift of the wind, gestures that became lessons without lectures. Her hands mimicked his, eyes wide and eager, yet cautious. The cabin walls absorbed their movements, sheltering not just bodies, but the fragile trust growing between them. Night fell with sudden darkness, stars flaring above like distant lanterns. The locket, cleaned from dust and warmth, rested on the mantel, catching moonlight in a faint golden gleam. It shone like a promise between past and present, memory and hope. The weight of unspoken vows pressed into the small metal heart. A distant howl split the stillness. Carried across the mountain ridges, sharp and lonely, the girl's small hands clenched around the locket. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Mama, I hope he can be my papa." The cowboy's eyes narrowed, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. He heard every word, felt the weight of it, but said nothing. His jaw set, hands brushing against the rifle resting near the hearth. Danger lurked beyond the pines. He sensed it in the cold wind, in the hush between rustling branches. The storm did not roar yet, but its promise coiled tightly in the air around them. He moved to a corner, inspecting the walls, knots in the timber, the way the roof slanted against the snow and wind. Each gesture was methodical, deliberate, a shield he built silently around the girl's world. She watched him, small eyes reflecting the firelight, understanding that protection could exist without conversation, that care could be expressed in action alone. Hours passed with the fire crackling low, the room shrinking into warmth. The girl's eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion, and she nestled into the blankets, still clutching the locket. He stayed nearby, posture rigid, yet patient, every muscle coiled as though he might spring into action at any moment. Sleep came slowly for him, the forest outside alive with unseen creatures. The echoes of the world beyond brushing against the cabin walls. Morning was a pale silver when the wind shifted, brushing pine needles against the wooden roof. The locket glinted faintly, catching light as if calling attention to itself, a reminder of what they had lost and what they might yet hold. The cowboy remained still for a moment, hand resting on the rifle, eyes scanning the horizon. The girl slept on, unaware of his vigilance, unaware that the quiet trust forming in the small cabin could soon be tested by the dangers of the mountains beyond. Beneath the whispering pines, the cabin stood as both fortress and cradle, a fragile world of firelight, blankets, and locketed promises. Outside, the forest waited, but for now they were together, and that, for the moment, was enough. Days stretched over the mountains like slow rivers of sunlight, warming stone and pine alike. The girl moved with cautious grace now, boots crunching against dry needles and loose rocks, face brightening as her timid smile returned. Her laughter, hesitant at first, rang against the cliffs, bouncing like wind through canyon walls, a sound the cowboy had not realized he'd missed until he heard it. He taught her to ride, hand firm at her back as she wobbled on the horse, reins clutched in small fingers. Each step was careful, each fall met with quiet reassurance, not scolding. Arrows of fear and uncertainty slowly melted into exhilaration as she learned to shoot, to read the land, to move with the wilderness rather than against it. Every lesson was layered with care, and each moment of triumph drew a faint light from her eyes. They planted a small garden outside the cabin, trowels scraping earth, seeds pressed gently into the soil. The cowboy showed her how to water the sprouts, how to watch for sun and wind. Each tiny green shoot that emerged was a quiet metaphor, a fragile hope growing from dust and patience. She laughed as dirt smeared across her cheeks. He smiled, lips tight but eyes warm, revealing the tenderness beneath his rough exterior. Meals were simple, shared by firelight in the cabin's worn glow. He mended torn clothes with hands that were calloused from work and travel, yet careful enough not to tear fragile fabric further. The girl watched, curiosity and trust mingling as the seams were stitched, the small motions carrying a wordless intimacy. A quiet bond formed in these shared routines: fire, food, repair, and laughter. Then the storm arrived, sudden and fierce, wind clawing at the cabin's timbers, rain hammering the roof in relentless drumming. The girl shivered, pressed close to him as the fire flickered and sparks danced along the walls. He draped a blanket over her shoulders, arms encircling her in silent protection. Outside, the world became a blur of shadows and sound. Inside, trust and care grew stronger, fragile as the locket resting on the mantel, glinting in the dancing light. At last, curiosity pierced her caution. "Did you have a family?" she asked, voice barely above the rain. He stiffened, jaw tightening, eyes flicking to the window as though the storm were a wall against his past. "I've been alone a long time," he said, words clipped, a careful deflection. But the question left its mark, stirring memories he had buried deep, faces lost to dust and time, promises broken by the frontier's cruelty. His hands tightened on the mug he held, knuckles white against its smooth surface, and he turned his gaze to the fire, refusing to speak further. Still, the girl persisted, small fingers brushing against his arm. "Did someone take them?" she whispered, the vulnerability of her question echoing his own buried grief. He remained silent, heart clenching, as if speaking would undo the careful balance he had built between them. The tension stretched, a taut rope ready to snap, until the storm outside shifted, rain tapering to soft patter. For a moment, quiet returned. He leaned back, watching her sleep, her small form curled against the blankets. Yet even in the calm, a sense of unease lingered, a whisper at the edge of his awareness. Then, across the ridge beyond the cabin, a silhouette emerged, distant but unmistakable. The wind carried the faint outline of a figure, moving with purpose toward their refuge. The girl stirred, sensing the change in his posture, the way his hand rested on the rifle, rigid and coiled. Her eyes widened in understanding, fear creeping over the warmth of their shared days. The cowboy's jaw set, muscles tensing. Threat had returned. The first shadow of betrayal now approached, distant yet imminently close, cutting through the fragile safety they had carved from stone, pine, and firelight. He did not speak. Words were useless now. Every motion, every breath became anticipation. The girl pressed closer, hands clutching the locket at her chest, her small anchor in the storm of fear. Outside, the night waited, heavy with unseen eyes. Inside, trust and tenderness coiled tightly against the approaching danger, ready to be tested for the first time. The cabin, once a sanctuary, became a crucible. Firelight flickered across walls and eyes, the rhythm of their bond echoing against the walls as the frontier's cruelty pressed near. And in the quiet, tense pause before the silhouette closed in, both understood that the fragile hope they had nurtured would soon collide with the relentless reckoning of the world beyond their walls. The wind carried a sharp scent of danger through the pines, rustling needles like whispers of warning. From the ridge, Shadows moved. Bounty hunters, relentless and methodical, tracing the trail they had left behind. The cowboy's eyes narrowed, hand brushing the rifle, knuckles tightening against worn wood. The girl crouched beside him, small fingers clutching the locket, her pulse echoing the tension in the cabin. He moved quietly, inspecting each window and shutter, every seam of timber and gap in the walls. His presence was calm, but the weight behind his eyes revealed the strain of responsibility he bore. They were cornered, the frontier pressing against their sanctuary. Yet he did not panic. Every breath, every movement was precise, measured, protective. The girl watched him, heart thudding with a mixture of fear and admiration. For the first time, she saw him not just as a stoic guardian, but as a man shaped by loss, bound by a moral code that demanded he protect innocence at any cost. A flicker of vulnerability crossed his face as he adjusted the rifle strap and glanced at the door, calculating the inevitable confrontation. "You'll be safe," he murmured, voice low, almost to himself. "I won't let them touch you." Her eyes widened, and in that moment, a spark of trust ignited. Trust that went beyond fear, beyond dependency. She was beginning to see him not just as a protector, but as a father figure, someone whose hands bore scars from hardship, yet could hold tenderness as easily as a weapon. The locket rested in her small palms, its glint catching the last light of dusk, a symbol of hope and continuity, a bridge between their lives. Night fell like a blanket, draping shadows over the cabin. They shared a quiet meal, simple bread and cold stew, the firelight flickering across their faces. The cowboy allowed himself a fleeting smile, brief and subtle, as the girl traced the locket, murmuring stories of the family it once belonged to. He said nothing, yet the softness in his eyes betrayed the truth he carried silently. Later, as embers burned low, the locket's secret revealed itself, unspoken until now. He reached for it gently, holding it in his rough palm. The girl looked up, questioning, and he finally spoke. "This belonged to my daughter." The words were measured, heavy with grief. His voice cracked slightly, the first fissure in the stoic armor he had worn so long. Her small hands tightened around the locket, understanding without needing explanation. Their griefs intertwined, her loss of a mother, his loss of a child, binding them in fragile trust. She whispered softly, "Then, you'll be my papa?" The cowboy's chest rose and fell, the weight of past sorrow and present responsibility pressing together. He did not speak. His silence was answer enough, a tacit promise. In that moment, hope flickered brighter than any fire, fragile yet enduring, carried in the small circle of warmth between them. But trust was not enough to shield them from the world. Outside, the hunters pressed closer, their approach marked by snapping twigs and muffled footsteps through underbrush. The cowboy's eyes scanned the darkened forest, ears attuned to the rhythm of pursuit. Every instinct screamed alert, every muscle coiled for confrontation. The girl clutched the locket tighter, pulse quickening, sensing the shift in the air. She had learned to read him, to trust the subtle cues of danger he now radiated. Yet her own heart raced with a new tension. Distrust among the newcomers could shatter the fragile sanctuary they had built. Unraveling hope into fear, he positioned himself near the door, rifle at the ready, eyes never leaving the shadows. The wind carried the faint sound of footsteps, approaching, deliberate, inevitable. The cabin seemed smaller, the firelight flickering against walls now heavy with anticipation. The locket gleamed in the girl's hands, a talisman in a world where danger pressed ever closer. The night deepened, shadows stretching long, and the first crackle of fear threaded through the warmth of their small haven. The bounty hunter's approach was no longer abstract. It was real, imminent. The cowboy's jaw tightened, hand resting firmly on the rifle, muscles coiled, breath measured. The girl's small voice trembled beside him, yet she did not move. Trust had taken root, but the frontier demanded vigilance, and the silence of the cabin carried the echo of inevitable confrontation. Outside, footsteps continued toward the door, steady, unrelenting, punctuating the night like a drumbeat of threat. Inside, father and child waited, intertwined by grief, trust, and fragile hope, ready for the moment the world would test them. The first light of dawn painted the mountains in pale gold, filtering through the pines and catching on the girl's small face as she stirred. She held the locket, tracing its edges with tentative fingers, thoughts churning like the wind through the ridges. Something had shifted in the cabin over the last days. The cowboy's quiet strength, the way he moved and protected, had begun to feel like more than shelter. It felt like home, fragile yet real. "Did you ever do things you regret?" she asked, voice trembling. Her words were careful, testing the walls he had built around himself. He stiffened, gaze fixed on the fire embers, jaw tightening. The question hung in the room, heavier than any threat outside. The locket caught a ray of morning light, glinting faintly. He swallowed, the silence stretching. For years he had buried the truth under dust, guns, and distance. Now her small eyes held him accountable. I was once an outlaw," he admitted finally, voice low, rough as gravel over stone. "Wronged by the law, forced to run. I've carried it all these years. Failures I can't undo." His shoulders slumped, stoicism cracking, revealing the weight he bore. The girl's breath caught, but she did not recoil. Instead, she studied him, curiosity and empathy mingling in her gaze. She moved closer, placing her small hands near his. "The locket," she whispered. "It means something to you, doesn't it?" His fingers brushed against hers, hesitant, and for the first time he spoke fully of the past. "It belonged to my daughter," he said, voice breaking, eyes glistening with memories he had tried to bury. She was taken." He looked down at her, small and fragile, and a faint tremor passed through his frame. "When I found you, I saw a chance to make right what I couldn't before." Her fingers tightened on the locket. "Then maybe I can be your daughter," she murmured, voice soft but earnest. He drew a deep breath, shoulders rising with the weight of hope and sorrow intertwined. For the first time, they allowed themselves the embrace of vulnerability, the fragile connection forged through loss and trust. But the moment was short-lived. A sudden flash of reality tore through the cabin like a knife. The girl's eyes widened, words stuck in her throat as he drew in a harsh breath. "Your mother," he muttered, face hardening. His calm, measured facade collapsed, replaced by raw anger and desperate love. "She's been captured," he said, jaw set, fists clenched at his sides. "A corrupt lawman, deeper in peril than we imagined." His eyes burned with a mix of grief and fury, scanning the distant ridge as if he could see the injustice from here. Every muscle coiled, every heartbeat thrumming with resolve. The girl's hand brushed his arm, tentative. Can we help her?" she asked, small but steady. "Yes," he growled, voice low, controlled but seething. "We will." He moved to the mantel, taking a long moment to glance at the locket, now more than a token. It was a symbol of loss, of hope, of the chance to redeem what had been stolen. He tucked it into his pocket, close to his heart. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of the distant town, of dust, smoke, and the lawman who held her. He strapped the rifle across his back, the weight familiar yet heavy with purpose. Boots hit the ground, stirring dust that shimmered in the early light. Every motion was deliberate, the calm precision of a man who had been hunted and hardened by the frontier. The girl followed, small and wary, yet trusting. She clutched the locket, its gleam catching the morning sun, a beacon between past and future. The cowboy glanced at her briefly, eyes softening for a heartbeat, before shifting back to the ridge ahead. The mountains stretched behind them, the valley below opening into a world of peril and possibility. "I'll bring her back," he whispered, voice tight with promise. "No matter the cost." She nodded, understanding more than words could convey. The locket caught a sliver of sunlight as if affirming the vow, a fragile symbol anchoring hope in a world that had offered little mercy. He mounted his horse, the girl climbing after him with careful guidance. The pines swayed, shadows stretching, across the trail as they rode toward the distant town, toward danger, toward the mother whose fate now rested in their hands. The wind tugged at their coats, dust swirling at their feet, carrying the weight of grief, trust, and determination across the mountains. And in that moment, father and surrogate daughter rode together, bound by loss, love, and the glimmering locket that promised redemption. Ahead lay peril, betrayal, and fire, but also the fragile hope that the frontier, harsh as it was, could yet allow justice, reunion, and healing. Dawn broke in streaks of fire and gold across the canyon ridges, the air brittle and tense. The Wind carried a metallic scent of danger as the lawman and his posse emerged from the tree line, boots crunching against frost-hardened dirt. The cowboy's eyes narrowed, scanning the ridge and valley below. The girl clutched the locket in her palm, heart hammering like a drumbeat of warning. "Hold on," he said, voice low but firm, as he vaulted onto his horse with practiced precision. The girl followed, gripping the reins with small hands, legs trembling. But the glint of determination in her eyes mirrored the locket's golden shine. The chase erupted with sudden fury, hooves pounding against stone and dust, the air ripped by shouts and gunfire. They dashed through dry riverbeds, stones skittering under the horses' hooves. A bullet whizzed past, kicking up dust and scraping the cowboy's shoulder. He gritted his teeth, feeling the sting, but did not falter, guiding the girl through the narrow canyon passages. The locket caught the first light of morning again, gleaming as if urging them forward, a small beacon amid chaos. The posse pressed relentlessly, their shouts echoing off cliffs, boots thudding over roots and rocks. The girl's pulse raced, yet she stayed close, following his movements instinctively. She had seen him dodge, weave, and protect, his actions precise and fearless, each motion calculated to keep them alive. Fear burned, but awe sparked in her chest. This man was no longer a distant guardian. He was her anchor, a force both protective and heroic in the face of death. Through pine forests, shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, glinting off the locket as if marking the path. Every tree became a shield, every bend in the trail a potential salvation or trap. The cowboy's breathing was steady, controlled, even as the sting on his shoulder reminded him of mortality. "Keep close," he urged, voice rough but calm, each word slicing through the din of pursuit. Despite the terror, the girl's courage surfaced in small, sharp ways. She pointed out hidden hollows, suggested narrow gaps where horses could pass, her eyes bright with the daring of the inexperienced, yet perceptive. He glanced at her mid-gallop, jaw tight, heart lifting in quiet respect. Her bravery gave him an idea, a plan to turn the hunters' momentum against them. They scrambled over loose boulders, the canyon walls towering on either side, dust rising like smoke around them. Another shot grazed the cowboy's back, searing pain but no falter. The girl's hands tightened around the reins, knuckles white, yet she remained composed, trusting him completely. Each narrow escape tightened the bond between them, a dance of survival written in sweat, grit, and dust. By mid-morning, the canyon opened to a jagged cliff edge, sheer drops into shadows below. The lawman's posse gained, shouts carrying with echoing menace. The cowboy brought the horse to a sudden halt, scanning the narrow passage, his back still. Stung, his shoulder burning, but the plan had formed. The terrain itself could be weapon. He glanced at the girl who nodded silently, clutching the locket now more than ornament, symbol, compass, and talisman of hope. "Ready?" he asked, voice low, eyes steely. She gripped the locket tighter, nodding, heart thundering in rhythm with his. The wind whipped around them, carrying grit and tension, twisting dust into the air. Below, the drop yawned like a black maw, the canyon's jagged teeth threatening to swallow them whole. The lawman shouted, closing in, footsteps pounding on the cliffside path. There was no room for error. Every heartbeat could be the last. The cowboy's jaw tightened, gaze locked on the approaching threat, eyes blazing with resolve and desperate love. The girl's fingers brushed the locket, as if drawing courage from its tiny weight. The wind tore through the canyon, whipping dust into their faces, the horses snorting and stamping. Ahead lay the edge, behind pressed the lawman, and the narrow path left no margin for misstep. Dust stung their eyes, adrenaline sharpened every sense, and the roar of pursuit drowned out the world beyond the cliffs. And there, teetering on the precipice, the cowboy and the girl faced the lawman's relentless force. The locket glinted in the sun, a small shard of hope against the looming danger. Every muscle coiled, every breath held, every heartbeat counted. The canyon held its breath, the wind a chorus of warning, the cliff a stage for the imminent showdown. And in that tense, frozen moment, father and daughter by choice waited for the next move, hearts pounding, dust swirling, and survival balanced on the edge of fate. The canyon echoed with the harsh report of gunfire, bullets thudding against rock and wood, sending sparks of dust into the rising sun. The lawman's posse scattered, shadows flitting across jagged cliffs. But he remained, face hard, eyes burning with greed and malice. The cowboy crouched behind a boulder, rifle raised, muscles coiled, pulse thrumming with desperate resolve. The girl clutched the locket around her neck, its small golden surface catching sunlight like a beacon. She ducked low, eyes wide but sharp, scanning for openings. "Over there!" she whispered, pointing toward a fallen boulder that could shield them while allowing the cowboy a clean shot. Her voice, steady amid chaos, was a spark of hope, her courage cutting through fear. He moved like shadow and muscle, firing in controlled bursts, each shot precise, forcing the lawman back. The canyon walls reverberated with echoes of gunfire, rock dust swirling around boots and hooves. Yet for all the violence, his eyes never left the girl, ensuring each move protected her. She mirrored his focus, ducking, rolling, dragging supplies, and the small bundle that contained the mother's cloak. A flash of steel from the lawman sent a shiver through the air, narrowly missing him. The cowboy lunged, rolling across loose stones, and rose to fire again. The girl, nimble and quick, used a fallen branch to trip one of the lawman's men, buying precious seconds. Each small victory seemed fragile, like the sprout they had planted outside the cabin, crushed by storm yet stubbornly upright in the dirt. The garden's tiny resilience mirrored their own. Suddenly the mother emerged from the shadow of a boulder, hands raised but eyes blazing. The lawman lunged to intercept her, but the cowboy's rifle barked, sending him stumbling backward. Dust rose like smoke, swirling around the trio as bullets kicked up stone and dirt, a brutal rhythm of survival. The cowboy reached the mother, first grasping her arm, dragging her behind the last cover. The girl's locket swung against her chest as she ran, glinting in sunlight, a symbol of hope, of trust, and of the family they were forging amid chaos. The lawman's mask of authority slipped, revealing the cruel opportunist beneath. His eyes wide with surprise at their coordinated defense. Frontier justice, raw and unflinching, met him in a hail of gunfire and careful maneuvering, each move precise and deliberate, echoing the cowboy's moral code. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, cliffs silent witnesses to the struggle. A final shot cracked through the air, and the lawman crumpled, unmasked and defeated. The posse, seeing their leader fallen, scattered into the canyon, their threat extinguished like sparks in dust. The cowboy lowered his rifle, shoulders heaving, eyes scanning for further danger. None came. The mother fell into his arms, relief and exhaustion mingling in her gaze. The girl ran to them, laughter spilling from her lips, echoing off cliffs that had once carried only fear and shadows. The cowboy allowed himself a rare, open smile, softening the hard edges of his face. For a fleeting moment, the weight of the frontier lifted, leaving only warmth and fragile peace. He glanced down at the girl, eyes locking with hers. In the dirt near the boulder, the sprout from their cabin garden pushed through the dust, still standing despite chaos, a stubborn testament to endurance and hope. The locket rested in her hands again, catching the sunlight, shining like a bridge between past loss and present triumph. "Papa," she whispered, voice small but steady. And he ruffled her hair, hand rough yet gentle. The mother smiled faintly, gratitude deep in her eyes, trust restored. The cowboy's moral code, tested through fire and fear, had held. His sense of justice had not wavered, even when survival demanded grit and sacrifice. For a heartbeat, the canyon was still. Smoke and dust drifted lazily across jagged rocks, mingling with the morning wind. They stood together, battered but unbroken, bonded by firelight, bullets, and trust forged in peril. The girl laughed again, soft and bright, tugging at the locket, and he finally let himself exhale. Chest loosening from tension long held, but as relief washed over them, his gaze flicked toward the horizon, toward the distant mountains and the town beyond. A silent question lingered in his eyes. What came next in a world that never paused for healing? The chapter closed on that shared gaze. Father, daughter and mother, hearts still racing, the locket glinting between them, dust swirling around boots and cuffs. The frontier stretching beyond with more trials yet unseen. The mountains lay bathed in the soft gold of morning, mist curling through the pines like a whispered promise. The cabin stood solid once more, its shutters repaired, hearth warm, and smoke curling lazily into the sky. Dust had been swept from the floors, splintered boards patched with care, and the faint scent of pine and fresh earth mingled with the warmth of lingering firelight. Outside, the small garden they had planted flourished. Green shoots stretched toward the sun, leaves wet with dew and resilient despite storms and footsteps of chaos past. The cowboy knelt, brushing soil gently from the fragile stems, eyes soft, fingers calloused but careful. Beside him, the girl crouched, hands busy tucking a row of sprouting seeds. Dirt streaked on her cheeks and clothes, a smile bright and free across her face. She held the locket in her small hands, placing it in a tiny box carved from pine. Its golden surface caught the morning sun, gleaming faintly as if reflecting the long journey of loss and redemption it had witnessed. A new family portrait leaned against the cabin wall. Her mother, her and the cowboy, framed in the soft light, bonded through trials, bullets, and quiet nights of firelight. The girl hugged the cowboy tightly, her arms small but determined around his broad frame. "You're my papa now," she whispered, voice trembling with happiness and relief. He held her for a heartbeat longer than necessary, jaw tight, eyes glistening. A single tear slid down his rugged face, tracing a line of hard-earned vulnerability through the dust and grit. He nodded silently, words unnecessary, her trust, her love, the locket, the garden, all spoke for him. The mother joined them, resting her hand lightly on the cowboy's shoulder, eyes reflecting gratitude and shared resilience. They did not speak much. The mountains themselves seemed to hold conversation in the wind through pine needles, the rustle of leaves carrying meaning. Each gentle sound was affirmation. Life could still be tender, even in a frontier carved by hardship and cruelty. They watched the sun rise together, the sky brushing ridges in pastel shades of pink and gold. Dust motes danced in the beams, and the wind carried scents of pine, earth, and distant snow. The cowboy's eyes traced the horizon, chest rising slowly, exhaling relief and the quiet weight of hope. The girl leaned against him, small hands brushing the box containing the locket. A symbol of endurance, trust, and the fragility of life made strong. A soft movement caught their attention. A bird alighted near the garden, wings folding gently as it surveyed the flourishing sprouts. It sang a clear, bright note, piercing the quiet with joy. The cowboy watched, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The girl laughed softly, clapping her hands, the sound echoing against the pines. The bird, unafraid, hopped among the shoots, a living emblem of freedom, survival, and the enduring bond of their found family. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding, feeling the warmth of life returning to the mountains through the girl, her mother, and the fragile yet unbroken threads of connection they had stitched together. The locket rested safely nearby, a quiet promise of past loss transformed into present love. The garden, sunlit and green, mirrored the resilience of those who had endured, who had fought, who now could simply breathe. They lingered as the wind shifted, carrying distant scents, soft whispers through pine needles, the subtle symphony of the mountains alive and welcoming. Hearts were full, yet the open horizon beyond promised more journeys, more trials, more growth. For now, though, they were together. The frontier's cruelty had been tempered by courage, care, and quiet love. The bird sang again, and the cowboy, the girl, and her mother shared a glance, a silent understanding that life could be harsh, but in small acts, trust, bravery, and nurture, they had carved a place for hope. The locket glinted once more, the garden thrived, and the mountains stretched eternal, a canvas for freedom, survival, and the enduring bond of family they had chosen.